The world has always been captivated by the British royal family, a dynasty built not only on centuries of tradition, but also on carefully crafted appearances. Every birth, every marriage, every milestone is presented to the public as polished and perfect. Yet behind the gilded walls of palaces and grand estates, the truth has often been messy, riddled with secrets and unspoken compromises. And now, in a revelation that threatens to reshape everything we thought we knew about the Sussexes, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have whispered the words no one thought they'd ever admit. It's time to reveal everything. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. For years, rumors swirled like wildfire. Whispers that Meghan never carried Archie or Lilibet, that the pregnancies were illusions staged for the cameras, that legal documents were quietly adjusted to preserve the illusion of tradition. Critics called it conspiracy, defenders dismissed it as hate-driven gossip. But as time has proven again and again, in the world of royalty, smoke often signals fire. What once sounded outrageous now lands with eerie plausibility, because the couple themselves, through tears, finally confess. Both Archie and Lilibet were born via surrogacy. This is not just another celebrity admission. This is a seismic tremor that shakes the foundations of the monarchy itself. Royal births are not like ordinary births. They carry the weight of history, the legitimacy of lineage, and the continuity of the crown. The illusion that Meghan carried her children was not simply about privacy. It was about power, perception, and protection. And now, that illusion has shattered. Imagine the scene. Harry, red-eyed and exhausted, sitting across from Meghan, who clutches a handkerchief in trembling hands. They know that once the words are spoken aloud, once the truth is acknowledged, there is no turning back. The public they once charmed, the family they strained to please, the institution they fled, all of them will react with fury, disbelief, or vindication. Yet the couple knows silence is no longer an option. The truth has claws, and it has finally torn its way out. The revelation that Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy was not a sudden admission blurted out in a fit of frustration. It was the result of years of pressure, speculation, and emotional weight that finally broke the walls Harry and Meghan had built around themselves. The beginning of this story lies in the shadows of doubt cast during Meghan's first pregnancy announcement. At the time, the world celebrated the news. Headlines blared with excitement. The couple was paraded at royal events, and the narrative of a fresh, modern royal family was reinforced. Yet sharp-eyed observers noticed things that didn't quite fit. The fluctuating size of Meghan's baby bump, the way it seemed to shift and fold in certain photographs, and the carefully controlled access the public and even royal staff had to her during those months gave rise to questions. Those questions were swiftly dismissed as cruel gossip, but they refused to die. As months turned into years, the rumors hardened into suspicions. Still, Harry and Meghan stood firm. Their public stance was clear. They were the victims of a relentless press machine eager to discredit them. But privately, the burden of maintaining the facade weighed heavily. When the truth finally began to leak, it wasn't through scandal sheets or tabloid headlines. It was through whispered conversations and quiet revelations from people who had seen more than they were supposed to. Staff who had been instructed to maintain silence began to describe protocols that defied logic. Why was Meghan so rarely seen in the later stages of her pregnancy? Why were nurses and aides never allowed near her at certain times? Why was the birth certificate handled with such secrecy, unlike the transparent announcements of other royal children? These inconsistencies, once brushed aside, began to converge into something undeniable. The turning point, however, came when private letters surfaced, letters in which Meghan discussed the arrangements for surrogacy. These were not cold, contractual notes. They carried the tone of a woman who was desperate to protect her image while navigating an emotional and deeply personal decision. Harry, upon reading them, was shattered. The man who had always stood as Meghan's fiercest protector now faced the unbearable weight of confirmation. He had been complicit in presenting a false image to the world. His tears were not only for the lies told, but for the innocence lost, for himself, for his children, and for the institution that would never forgive such deception. The beginning of the introduction sets the stage with tension, but the middle must dive into the heart of why this revelation matters. The monarchy is not just a family. It is a living symbol, a carefully guarded narrative of legitimacy and continuity. Every royal birth is more than a joyous occasion. It is a public reassurance that the line of succession is intact, that tradition continues unbroken. In this context, Harry and Meghan's decision to hide their use of surrogates becomes more than a personal choice. It becomes a calculated act of preservation, an attempt to protect not only their privacy, but also their place within a centuries-old system that does not tolerate deviations from the script. Yet, what is striking is not just the act itself, but the desperation behind it. Meghan, new to the royal family, knew the scrutiny she faced was unlike anything she had ever endured as an actress. Her every move was dissected, her every gesture magnified. For her, the revelation that she could not or would not carry her children herself risked not just judgment, but humiliation. She feared being seen as less than, as unfit for the role she had stepped into. Harry, scarred by years of watching his mother's pain under public scrutiny, understood too well what exposure could do. And so, together, they built the illusion. A baby bump padded and disguised, a narrative spun with smiling appearances, and documents handled quietly to ensure no one looked too closely. But illusions are fragile. With every public outing, every photograph, every inconsistency, the facade cracked a little more. And in the digital age, where every image is analyzed frame by frame, truth is harder to bury. The couple's decision to flee the United Kingdom, often explained as an escape from media harassment, now takes on a sharper edge. Perhaps it was not just about headlines or paparazzi. Perhaps it was about running from a secret that was becoming harder to contain. The revelation now places Harry and Meghan in uncharted territory. They are no longer just the rebels who broke away from the monarchy. They are the couple who constructed one of the most elaborate deceptions in modern royal history. And while some will see this as an act of survival, others will view it as betrayal. Betrayal of the public's trust, of the monarchy's integrity, and even of their own children, who now grow up under the shadow of controversy. This admission also raises deeper questions. Why did it take so long for them to come forward? Why now, after years of denial and deflection? Some believe it was guilt, an unbearable burden finally lifted. Others think it was strategy, a carefully timed confession meant to seize control of the narrative before it exploded without their input. Whatever the reason, the timing ensures maximum impact. The world is listening. The monarchy is vulnerable, and their words carry more weight than ever. The emotional climax of the introduction lies in Harry's visible breakdown. For a man who has always prided himself on resilience, who endured the trauma of losing his mother in the public eye, this moment is devastating. He is not just confessing to a mistake. He is acknowledging years of deception that tarnished the very legacy he was born into. Meghan, too, is visibly shaken. Her tears are not only for the pain of the secret, but for the life she has built, a life now at risk of collapsing under the weight of truth. And so the introduction ends with a haunting question. What happens when a secret meant to protect ends up destroying everything instead? The truth, once a threat kept locked away, is now out in the open. There is no going back. The couple's future, the monarchy's image, and the perception of their children all hang in the balance. The stage is set for one of the most dramatic chapters in royal history, a story where love, fear, power, and truth collide with devastating force. The story of Harry and Meghan's revelation cannot be told in isolation. It must be set against the backdrop of a royal institution that has thrived for centuries on secrecy, control, and carefully managed images. For generations, the royal family has understood that appearances matter as much as, if not more than, reality. When the world sees a smiling couple on the steps of a hospital with a newborn in their arms, the image is absorbed as truth. No one asks questions, because the spectacle satisfies the narrative. The monarchy's endurance has always depended on this silent agreement between the institution and the public. The crown provides the appearance of stability, and the people agree not to look too closely behind the curtain. Harry and Meghan shattered that balance from the very beginning of their union. Their marriage, once hailed as a sign that the monarchy was modernizing and inclusive, quickly turned into a storm of controversy. Every gesture Meghan made was critiqued. Every word Harry spoke was compared to his brother's. When they announced their first pregnancy, it should have been a moment of unity and celebration. Instead, it became the seed of a storm that would grow far larger than anyone anticipated. For those who followed closely, the oddities were difficult to ignore. Meghan's public appearances during her pregnancy were limited and heavily controlled. The hospital birth announcement followed a script that felt offbeat compared to traditional royal protocol. Even the photographs released seemed carefully staged, lacking the spontaneity associated with new parents. The introduction's middle section is where the threads of doubt begin to weave into something undeniable. Once Meghan and Harry confirmed that Archie and Lilibet were born via surrogacy, all the scattered pieces of the puzzle suddenly aligned. The secrecy around Meghan's movements, the restricted access given to staff, the carefully edited public statements, it all made sense in hindsight. But the question remains, why hide it at all? In an era where surrogacy is increasingly normalized and accepted, what compelled them to go to such extraordinary lengths to protect this secret? The answer lies partly in the unique pressures of royalty. For most families, surrogacy is a personal medical or lifestyle choice. For the Windsors, it carries implications for legitimacy, tradition, and succession. A child born of a surrogate is no less loved or valued. But to the monarchy, optics and precedent matter more than anything. Admitting that Meghan had chosen surrogacy would have been framed by critics as a weakness, a departure from the unbroken chain of tradition. It could have been twisted by detractors into an argument against the child's place in the royal line. Whether valid or not, the fear of that narrative drove Harry and Meghan into silence. But there is also a deeply personal dimension. Meghan, already vilified by parts of the British press, knew that any perceived flaw or vulnerability would be weaponized against her. To admit to surrogacy would have been, in her mind, to hand her enemies ammunition. Harry, haunted by memories of how relentless media cruelty contributed to his mother's suffering, refused to let that happen. In their eyes, the lie was protection. They believed they were shielding their children from a world too cruel to understand. Yet, in choosing secrecy, they laid the groundwork for an even harsher backlash when the truth inevitably surfaced. The public's reaction to their confession reveals the complexity of human judgment. For some, the revelation elicited sympathy. People saw a couple cornered by impossible expectations, forced to pretend in order to survive. For others, it was proof of deceit, confirmation that Harry and Meghan could not be trusted. Their critics argue that it was not the surrogacy itself that mattered, but the layers of deception built around it. To present Meghan as pregnant, to stage appearances, to alter paperwork, all of these actions went beyond privacy and crossed into manipulation. The breach of trust was not in how the children were conceived, but in how the couple worked so hard to make the world believe a version of events they knew was untrue. As the introduction nears its emotional peak, the imagery of Harry's breakdown captures the essence of this revelation. Here is a man once adored for his candor and authenticity, now confronting the consequences of silence. His breakdown is not just personal grief, it is symbolic of a wider collapse. The illusion is gone, the truth undeniable, and the cost of deception clear. Meghan's tears reflect both vulnerability and calculation. She is grieving the exposure of her secret, but she is also aware of the narrative's power. Confession is both an act of catharsis and a strategy for survival. By owning the truth before it explodes, they reclaim a measure of control over their story. The end of the introduction leaves the audience with questions designed to pull them deeper into the story. What does this mean for Archie and Lilibet's place in the royal line? How will the monarchy react to such a breach of tradition? Can Harry and Meghan rebuild trust? Or has their confession cemented their role as outcasts forever? The admission of surrogacy is not simply the climax of a personal journey. It is the opening act of a larger drama that will reshape the legacy of the House of Windsor. This sets the tone for the chapters that follow. The story is no longer about rumors or speculation. It is about truth, confession, and the fallout of breaking centuries of silence. By the end of this introduction, the viewer understands the gravity of what has been revealed. The stage is no longer one of speculation. It is one of reckoning. Harry and Meghan's words have broken open a new chapter in royal history, and nothing will ever look the same again. The first cracks in Meghan Markle's carefully curated image as a glowing, expectant mother appeared almost as soon as she and Prince Harry announced that they were expecting their first child. At the time, the announcement was celebrated across the globe as a symbol of hope and renewal for the monarchy. The British royal family, often criticized for being out of touch with modern society, now had a young, charismatic couple at the forefront, and their child would embody both tradition and change. Yet, amid the applause and excitement, whispers of doubt began to swirl. Observers who had followed royal pregnancies for decades sensed something unusual in the way Meghan's pregnancy was presented. Those whispers, though hushed at first, soon grew louder. The royal family has always treated pregnancies with a certain level of ceremony. From Princess Diana's hospital photographs outside St. Mary's Lindo wing to Catherine, Princess of Wales, smiling on the same steps with each of her children, there exists a set of traditions and expectations the public has come to anticipate. Yet Meghan and Harry's approach was strikingly different. Almost immediately, the couple began limiting access to Meghan's appearances. Public events were carefully choreographed, and any opportunities to scrutinize her growing bump were fleeting. The media, always hungry for photographs, was left with limited images, some of which raised more questions than they answered. Photographs of Meghan during this period became a subject of intense scrutiny. Online forums and tabloid columns dissected every angle, comparing the size and shape of her belly from one day to the next. Some claimed the bump appeared to shift unnaturally, even folding at odd angles during certain movements. Others pointed out how Meghan seemed to cradle her stomach at nearly every opportunity, as though drawing attention to it rather than allowing it to appear naturally. Supporters dismissed these observations as the product of cruel bullying, accusing critics of inventing conspiracy theories fueled by bias. But skeptics countered that these inconsistencies could not simply be ignored. The whispers grew louder as Meghan entered her second and third trimesters. Unlike other royal mothers-to-be, she was rarely photographed during the later stages of her pregnancy. Staff members within the palace later admitted that access to Meghan was unusually restricted. Nurses, aides, and even senior staffers who would normally have played a role during this period were sidelined. Instructions were vague but firm. Meghan was not to be disturbed. While most obeyed without question, a few began quietly sharing their unease. Why such secrecy? Why such insistence on privacy when royal tradition demanded openness? When Archie's birth was announced, the oddities did not stop. Unlike the traditional photo op outside the hospital, where generations of royal children had been presented to the world, Harry and Meghan opted for a controlled, private photo shoot. Meghan, dressed immaculately just 2 days later, appeared flawless, without the exhaustion or physical changes many women experience immediately after giving birth. Some found it remarkable, even inspiring. Others found it suspicious. The public had seen Catherine look radiant after giving birth, but even she bore the visible strain of labor. Meghan, by contrast, appeared untouched by the ordeal. The official paperwork surrounding Archie's birth raised further eyebrows. His birth certificate was filed with delays and amendments, with questions surrounding the hospital listed in Meghan's details. While no outright evidence of wrongdoing was presented, the lack of transparency fueled more speculation. For royal watchers, it seemed unthinkable that such basic information could be mishandled in such a high-profile case. For skeptics, it was confirmation that something was being hidden. By the time Meghan's second pregnancy was announced, the whispers had turned into outright debate. Social media lit up with commentary. Some users posted side-by-side comparisons of her bumps, pointing out inconsistencies. Others speculated openly about the possibility of surrogacy. The palace's response was silence, but silence often speaks louder than words. The refusal to address the rumors directly was interpreted by many as a calculated choice to avoid further scrutiny. Within palace walls, the unease grew as well. Staff members noticed unusual protocols, including Meghan's insistence on privacy at times when most pregnant women required medical attention. Medical professionals were rarely seen entering or leaving her residence. Those who did were carefully vetted and kept out of sight. Even among senior royals, questions were quietly raised. Prince William, known for his more traditional adherence to protocol, is said to have voiced concern about the secrecy surrounding Meghan's pregnancies. Yet challenging Harry and Meghan directly risked deepening the already growing rift between the brothers. The media, too, played a critical role in amplifying the whispers. British tabloids, never shy about targeting Meghan, began running stories that danced around the surrogacy rumors without stating them outright. Phrases like unusual pregnancy and mystery surrounding Archie's birth appeared with increasing frequency. In the United States, coverage was softer, but even sympathetic outlets could not ignore the inconsistencies. The more Meghan and Harry tried to control the narrative, the more it seemed to spiral out of their grasp. For Meghan and Harry, this period must have been excruciating. Publicly, they maintained smiles and grace, projecting the image of a happy, expectant couple. Privately, they faced the impossible task of sustaining a narrative that was collapsing under scrutiny. Harry, fiercely protective of Meghan, often lashed out at the media, accusing it of cruelty and intrusion. Meghan, in turn, leaned into her role as victim of relentless bullying, framing the speculation as part of a broader campaign against her. For a time, this strategy worked. Sympathy poured in from fans around the world who saw Meghan as a woman under siege. But for every supporter who defended her, another skeptic dug deeper into the inconsistencies. The whispers of doubt, though never confirmed during those early years, planted seeds of mistrust that grew steadily. When Harry and Meghan stepped down as senior royals and moved to California, the rumors followed them across the Atlantic. Freed from the constraints of the palace, the couple rebranded themselves as champions of authenticity and truth. Yet the irony was unavoidable. The very foundation of their family life was built on a secret that contradicted their public image. This chapter, rooted in whispers and speculation, sets the stage for the storm that followed. Doubt is a powerful force, capable of eroding trust long before facts are confirmed. The royal couple may have believed that secrecy was their shield, but in truth, it became the weapon used most effectively against them. By trying to silence the whispers, they only made them louder. And when the confession finally came, that Archie and Lilibet were born via surrogacy, it was not a shocking twist, but the climax of a story that had been writing itself in the shadows all along. Behind every royal household lies an invisible army of staff, working tirelessly to uphold the image of grace and order the public expects. From nannies and personal assistants to senior aides and medical staff, their lives are dedicated to ensuring the machinery of royalty runs smoothly. For decades, they have operated under one guiding principle: loyalty. Discretion is not simply a preference. It is a condition of employment. Yet, even in such an environment, silence can grow heavy when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. During Meghan Markle's pregnancies, those who worked closest to her began noticing patterns that deviated from the royal norm. At first, they said nothing, trusting that there must be explanations they were not privy to. But as weeks turned into months, and secrecy hardened into rigid control, even the most loyal staffers felt the weight of doubt pressing down on them. Royal staff are no strangers to unusual requests. Each royal has their quirks, their preferences, their demands. But what Meghan and Harry imposed during the pregnancies raised eyebrows even among those who had seen everything. One nanny later admitted privately that she had been instructed not to ask questions about Meghan's condition, not to comment on her appearance, and never to inquire about medical arrangements. Nurses who would typically check on the well-being of a royal mother-to-be found themselves cut out of the process entirely. The official line was that Meghan preferred privacy, but for many staff, the restrictions bordered on paranoia. The turning point came when small inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. One aide recalled being present at a photo shoot when Meghan's bump appeared oddly shaped under her dress, shifting unnaturally as she bent down to greet a child. The incident was brushed off at the time, but whispered conversations followed. Another staffer noticed that Meghan's schedule often included long stretches of unavailability at times when most expectant mothers required medical appointments. When asked about these absences, supervisors would simply respond with vague explanations, discouraging any further curiosity. The silence demanded of staff was not casual. It was enforced through direct orders, veiled threats, and the ever-present understanding that disloyalty meant dismissal. Many of those who worked in the Sussex household were young, ambitious, and eager to build careers in the rarefied world of royal service. To risk that future by questioning Meghan's pregnancies was unthinkable. Still, behind closed doors, whispers circulated. "Have you noticed?" Became the beginning of countless hushed conversations in corridors and private quarters. The more they compared observations, the harder it became to ignore the truth staring back at them. For some staff, the secrecy was simply unsettling. For others, it was deeply troubling. One nanny confided to a colleague that she felt complicit in something deceptive, forced into a role where she was helping sustain a narrative she no longer believed. Another assistant described feeling caught between professional duty and personal conscience. Their jobs required them to protect Meghan and Harry's privacy, but at what cost? To some, the charade crossed a line between privacy and deceit. The atmosphere inside the Sussex household grew increasingly tense as Meghan's due dates approached. Unlike other royal births, where hospitals were alerted and preparations made well in advance, the staff here were kept in the dark. Some were told at the last minute that Meghan would be unavailable during critical hours, with no explanation provided. Others noticed that arrangements for childcare and postnatal support were made weeks before any official birth announcement, as though someone had foreknowledge of when the children would arrive. It became clear to many that they were not witnessing a traditional pregnancy at all, but rather managing the optics of one. The silence extended beyond the palace walls. Outside contractors, including photographers and event organizers, were also instructed to follow unusual protocols. One photographer recalled being told explicitly not to capture Meghan from certain angles during public appearances. Another mentioned that all images had to be reviewed and approved by Meghan's team before release, an uncommon practice even in the image-conscious world of royalty. These measures only deepened suspicions among those who worked behind the scenes. And yet, despite their doubts, most staff remained quiet. They understood that the royal family's power extended far beyond their paychecks. To speak out risked not only their jobs, but their reputations. Confidentiality agreements, signed at the beginning of their employment, hung over their heads like shadows. Breaking silence could lead to lawsuits, financial ruin, or worse, being ostracized from the small, tight-knit world of royal service. So they buried their unease, smiled through the deception, and told themselves that it was not their place to interfere. But silence does not erase truth. It only delays its revelation. In the years that followed, some staff left their positions, unable to reconcile their experiences with their consciences. A few confided to journalists off the record, hinting at irregularities but stopping short of direct accusations. Others waited until Harry and Meghan's confession, finally able to release the burden they had carried in silence. For many, it was a bittersweet vindication. They had known all along, but they had been powerless to say so. The story of the silent staff underscores a deeper truth about the royal family. The monarchy is not upheld by crowns and thrones, but by the quiet, invisible labor of those who dedicate their lives to service. Their discretion is the glue that holds together the fragile facade of perfection. Yet in Meghan's case, that discretion was stretched to its breaking point. They were not merely protecting privacy. They were helping sustain an illusion. Some did so willingly, out of loyalty. Others did so reluctantly, out of fear. But all were bound together in the same web of silence. This silence, however, came at a cost. For the staff, it meant living with the knowledge that they were part of a deception. For Harry and Meghan, it meant building a fragile shield that could not withstand scrutiny. And for the monarchy, it meant further erosion of trust. When the truth emerged, the silence of the staff was recast not as loyalty, but as complicity. They had been unwilling participants in a drama that would eventually explode onto the world stage. The chapter ends with the haunting realization that silence can be as powerful as speech. The staff may not have spoken aloud, but their unease, their whispers, and their eventual departures painted a picture more damning than any public statement could. In their silence lay the echoes of a truth the world was not yet ready to hear. Archie and Lilibet's arrivals were not what they seemed. And when the confession finally came, those who had remained silent all along felt both vindicated and betrayed. Vindicated because their doubts were proven correct. Betrayed because they had sacrificed their integrity to protect a secret that could not stay hidden forever. The staff's silence was not simply the absence of words. It was the quiet testimony of those who saw, who knew, and who bore the weight of complicity in one of the monarchy's most carefully guarded deceptions. Their silence shaped the narrative as much as any spoken lie. And in the end, it was that silence that paved the way for the shocking truth to come roaring into the light. The monarchy has long understood the art of storytelling. Every photograph, every public appearance, every carefully chosen word is designed to reinforce the image of stability and continuity. For Harry and Meghan, this art became a lifeline. Faced with a reality they felt compelled to hide, they turned to narrative as both weapon and shield. Their story was not simply lived, it was constructed, curated, and orchestrated to perfection, or so they believed. But as with any illusion, cracks eventually appeared, revealing the fragile scaffolding beneath. The story began with the announcement of Meghan's first pregnancy. It was delivered during a royal tour, a deliberate choice to ensure global headlines. The setting was ideal, Meghan and Harry abroad, basking in goodwill, embodying the modern, relatable royals the monarchy wanted the world to see. The timing of the announcement allowed the narrative to expand organically, with each subsequent appearance reinforcing the image of an expectant mother glowing under the spotlight. Yet from the beginning, there were signals that control, not spontaneity, guided the entire presentation. Every event was timed and staged, with Meghan's bump carefully showcased or shielded depending on the desired effect. As the pregnancy progressed, the narrative grew more elaborate. Instead of the openness traditionally associated with royal pregnancies, there was a noticeable tightening of control. Harry and Meghan's team managed media access with unprecedented strictness. Journalists were told where they could stand, what they could photograph, and when they could ask questions. The palace, once accustomed to accommodating the press's appetite for royal family milestones, suddenly found itself navigating a fortress built around Meghan's image. Requests for interviews or informal access were denied, often with sharp reminders that Meghan deserved privacy. While privacy is understandable for any expectant mother, the sheer intensity of control suggested something more was at play. The crafting of the narrative extended into the smallest details. Meghan's wardrobe, always a subject of fascination, became a key instrument in shaping perception. Flowing gowns that emphasized her bump were alternated with coats that concealed it, sparking endless speculation. At times, her choice of clothing seemed almost theatrical, as though designed to provoke debate. Every gesture was equally calculated. Meghan's constant habit of cradling her stomach became a hallmark of her pregnancy, but critics argued it felt exaggerated, as though intended to draw attention to the very thing she wanted to keep unquestioned. Supporters defended her, but the debate itself only kept the narrative alive. Then came the birth announcement of Archie, perhaps the most carefully orchestrated moment of all. Unlike William and Kate, who had adhered to the long-standing tradition of appearing outside the hospital with their newborn, Harry and Meghan rejected the script. They opted for a private photo shoot at Windsor Castle, away from the public eye. The photographs were polished, the lighting perfect, the expressions joyful. Yet the absence of the raw, unscripted moment, the proud parents emerging from the hospital, the baby swaddled in a blanket, spoke volumes. For the first time in modern royal history, the public was denied the spectacle it had come to expect. In its place was a curated tableau, beautiful but strangely hollow. The official documents only added to the perception of orchestration. Archie's birth certificate contained discrepancies and delays, further fueling questions. Rumors circulated about which hospital had been used, who had been present, and why information was withheld. When reporters pressed for clarity, they were met with vague statements or outright refusals. For royal watchers, the contrast with the openness of William and Kate's births was stark. Where transparency had once reassured the public, secrecy now bred suspicion. When Lilibet was born, the narrative became even more tightly managed. By then, Harry and Meghan had left royal duties behind and resettled in California. Yet their control over the story was stronger than ever. The announcement was brief, sanitized, and followed by carefully selected photographs. Again, the absence of candid hospital images raised eyebrows. Even in their new life, far from palace traditions, they clung to secrecy with a tenacity that suggested fear rather than freedom. The orchestrated narrative was no longer about protecting royal protocol. It was about shielding a truth that could not be spoken aloud. The orchestration extended beyond events and documents. It seeped into interviews, speeches, and even casual conversations. When Harry and Meghan sat down for high-profile interviews, their words were rehearsed, their answers polished. Questions about the pregnancies were brushed aside with well-prepared responses about privacy and dignity. They positioned themselves as victims of intrusion, flipping the narrative to one of persecution rather than deception. It was a clever strategy, one that won them sympathy and support from millions. But it also ensured that the truth remained buried beneath layers of spin. What makes this narrative so striking is how consistent it was. From the earliest pregnancy announcement to the staged photographs after the births, every moment followed the same pattern: control the story, deny access, and frame the narrative as one of privacy and dignity. For years, it worked. Supporters rallied to their defense, pointing to the couple's right to manage their own lives. Critics were dismissed as conspiracy theorists, their concerns drowned out by accusations of bias and cruelty. But beneath the surface, the orchestrated narrative was always brittle. It depended on everyone playing their part. The staff staying silent, the media respecting boundaries, and the public accepting what they were shown without question. The collapse of this narrative came not with a dramatic revelation, but with the slow erosion of trust. Each inconsistency, each unanswered question, each overly polished photograph chipped away at the illusion. When the confession finally came, that both Archie and Lilibet were born via surrogacy, the entire edifice crumbled. Suddenly, what had once been dismissed as rumor became evidence. The narrative, once so carefully constructed, now stood exposed as a facade. Yet the orchestration itself is part of the story. It reveals not only the desperation of Harry and Meghan to protect their secret, but also the immense pressure of royal life. They were trapped between two impossible realities: the truth of their children's births and the expectations of a world that demanded perfection. In choosing to orchestrate a narrative, they sought control in a world where they had so little. But in doing so, they set themselves on a path where truth and illusion could no longer be untangled. The chapter closes with the recognition that the narrative was never about deception for its own sake. It was about survival. Harry and Meghan believed they were safeguarding their children, their reputations, and their place in history. But by orchestrating every detail, they created an illusion so fragile that it shattered the moment reality intruded. In the end, the carefully orchestrated narrative became their undoing, a reminder that truth, no matter how inconvenient, always finds its way to the surface. For years, speculation about Meghan's pregnancies lingered in the shadows of public discourse, never fully extinguished yet never confirmed. Whispers carried from one corner of the media to another, staff rumors slipped through guarded lips, and body language analysts dissected photographs frame by frame. But all of these fragments, rumors, suspicions, and theories, remained just that: fragments. What transformed speculation into undeniable reality was the discovery of private letters. These letters, written in Meghan's own hand and preserved against her wishes, carried within them the weight of truth that not even the most carefully orchestrated narrative could suppress. The letters were not meant for the public eye. They were communications, personal and raw, intended for those who had facilitated the arrangements behind the scenes. In them, Meghan expressed gratitude, fear, and, most tellingly, anxiety about how the truth could be contained. They revealed not just the fact of surrogacy, but the extent of the lengths to which she and Harry had gone to preserve the illusion. For Prince Harry, reading them was nothing short of devastating. Here, in ink and paper, was confirmation of what he had known deep down, but never dared to confront fully. His world shifted the moment those words met his eyes. The first of these letters was reportedly written during the arrangements for Archie. It was addressed to a trusted intermediary who had worked with Meghan in securing a surrogate. In it, Meghan described her conflicted emotions: her gratitude to the woman who would carry her child, her shame at what the public would think, and her determination that no one outside the inner circle should ever know. She wrote of her fear that acknowledging surrogacy would turn her into a target, amplifying the media attacks already leveled at her. The letter was not cold or clinical. It carried the voice of a woman terrified of losing control over her image and her future. Another letter, written during the preparations for Lilibet's birth, revealed even more. In this one, Meghan expressed exhaustion from the strain of keeping up appearances. She confessed that the weight of secrecy was crushing her and Harry, that even their closest aides were beginning to sense something was amiss. Yet despite her fatigue, she insisted the truth must remain hidden. She wrote of staged photographs, adjusted timelines, and the importance of maintaining dignity in the eyes of the world. Most heartbreakingly, she admitted to fearing that the children themselves would one day suffer if the truth came out too soon. When Harry read these words, it was said he broke down. The man who had spent years defending Meghan against criticism and rumor now faced the raw evidence that the whispers he had fought so hard to silence were grounded in reality. It was not the fact of surrogacy itself that devastated him. Harry had long believed that family is defined by love, not by biology or tradition. It was the deception, the years spent building a lie, that tore him apart. He had stood before the world as a proud father, certain that his defense of his wife was righteous. Now he had to confront the fact that he had unknowingly become complicit in misleading the public. The letters also carried legal implications. They contained references to contracts, confidentiality agreements, and medical arrangements, details that proved the orchestration of secrecy was deliberate and systematic. Lawyers had been involved, paperwork altered, timelines adjusted, and records sealed. It was not merely a personal choice to remain private, but a coordinated campaign to ensure the truth never reached the light of day. For a family that represented tradition and transparency, such revelations were catastrophic. Beyond their factual content, the letters revealed the emotional toll secrecy had taken on both Harry and Meghan. Meghan's words oscillated between gratitude and despair. She thanked those who helped her, but she also confessed to feeling like a fraud. She feared not only for her own reputation, but also for Harry's, worried that the revelation would destroy the fragile bond he still maintained with his family. She knew how much the monarchy relied on appearances, and she felt trapped between her role as a royal and her reality as a woman who had chosen surrogacy. For Harry, these letters were a mirror held up to his own fears. They reflected the weight he had carried since childhood, the knowledge that the monarchy demands perfection, even at the cost of humanity. In Meghan's words, he saw echoes of his mother's struggles, the suffocating pressure Diana had faced when her truth conflicted with royal expectations. Harry's breakdown, when confronted with the letters, was not only about Meghan's choices, but about the broader system that had forced them into silence. The letters also altered the dynamic between Harry and Meghan. Until then, their struggle had been framed as a battle against external forces, the media, the palace, the critics. But with the letters laid bare, Harry could no longer ignore the role Meghan herself had played in constructing the illusion. He did not doubt her love or her intentions, but the realization that she had insisted on secrecy at such cost left him shaken. Their marriage, built on unity against the world, now faced the fracture of internal truth. When the letters eventually came to light outside their private circle, the effect was explosive. Critics seized on them as proof of deception, while supporters argued they demonstrated the immense pressure Meghan was under. The media dissected every phrase, debating whether Meghan's words revealed cunning manipulation or desperate survival. But for the public, the impact was more visceral. Seeing Meghan's own handwriting confirm what had long been suspected turned whispers into undeniable truth. The illusion was gone, replaced by the raw reality of secrecy and confession. The chapter's importance lies not only in the revelation of the letters, but in their symbolism. They represent the moment when speculation became certainty, when rumor became fact. They are the bridge between the carefully orchestrated narrative of Chapter 3 and the emotional fallout that follows. They show that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing, sometimes in the form of words written in private, never meant to be seen, yet destined to change everything. The letters that changed everything are more than historical footnotes. They are the heartbeat of the story, the undeniable proof that shattered illusions and forced confession. They show Meghan's vulnerability and fear, Harry's anguish and betrayal, and the monarchy's fragile reliance on appearances. In those handwritten words lies the truth the world had waited for. The truth that finally brought the whispers out of the shadows and into the blinding light. There are moments in every life when the weight of secrecy, grief, and inner conflict converge into something unmanageable. For Prince Harry, that moment arrived the day the truth about his children's births could no longer be hidden. Not from the world, not from the monarchy, and not even from himself. For years, he had been the shield, the defender, the man who stood before cameras and insisted that the rumors surrounding his wife were nothing but lies spun by a cruel and racist press. He had built his life around protecting Meghan, determined that she would never endure what his mother had suffered. But the discovery of the letters, and the growing impossibility of sustaining the illusion, cracked the shield he had held up for so long. His breaking point was as much about the collapse of trust within himself as it was about the collapse of the story they had told the world. The weight Harry carried was not only that of a father and husband, but also that of a prince who had been raised within one of the most scrutinized families on earth. His entire life had been shaped by the unspoken rule that appearances mattered above all else. From the moment of his birth, his image had been managed, his choices guided, his missteps magnified. He had always been the spare, but even the spare carried the burden of tradition. When he chose Meghan, he believed he had found a partner who would help him build a different life, one not bound by the same rules that had crushed his mother. Yet, by choosing secrecy around surrogacy, he had walked directly back into the same trap, protecting appearances at the expense of truth. Those close to Harry described the visible toll it took on him. He had always been quick to laugh, his warmth and humor often disarming even the most hardened critics. But as the years of secrecy dragged on, his demeanor changed. Friends noticed he was quicker to anger, more defensive, less at ease. His interviews, once marked by candid charm, grew sharp-edged, his words laced with bitterness toward the press and the institution he had fled. Behind those words was not just anger, but exhaustion. He was fighting a battle on too many fronts, against the monarchy, against the tabloids, against the world's expectations, and now, most painfully, against himself. The breaking point came when the letters Meghan had written confirmed in black and white what the rumors had long suggested. Harry could no longer tell himself that the speculation was baseless. He could no longer comfort himself with the idea that they were only shielding their privacy. The truth was plain. They had deliberately constructed a facade. Reading Meghan's words, her confessions of fear, her insistence on secrecy, her meticulous planning, broke something inside him. He had defended her, sometimes angrily, sometimes blindly, and in doing so had become complicit in deceiving the world. His anger was not only at Meghan or the monarchy, but at himself. He had failed the principles he thought he stood for. There are accounts that describe Harry in tears, sitting alone in silence after reading those letters. For a man who had grown up under the cameras, who had learned from childhood to mask emotion when necessary, such vulnerability was rare. Yet this was not the grief of a child losing his mother or the frustration of a soldier navigating royal duty. This was the grief of a man who had spent years convincing himself he was fighting for truth, only to realize he had been fighting to preserve a lie. It was a collapse of identity as much as of conviction. The emotional strain spilled into his marriage. Until then, Harry and Meghan had been united in their battles, their strength drawn from standing together against criticism. But now the battlefield shifted inward. Harry struggled to reconcile his love for Meghan with his feelings of betrayal. He did not doubt her devotion to him or their children, but the fact that she had pressed so strongly for secrecy, even as he fought so publicly, left him reeling. Their conversations grew more tense. Meghan, in tears, pleaded that it had been necessary, that they had no other choice, that the monarchy and the media would have destroyed them if they had known the truth. Harry, though sympathetic, could not shake the sense that their silence had become its own kind of destruction. The breaking point was not marked by a single explosive argument or dramatic walkout, but by a slow unraveling of Harry's resolve. He began to question everything: his decision to leave the monarchy, his trust in Meghan's judgment, his ability to shield his children from the consequences of their choices. In public, he remained the devoted husband and father, but in private, his doubts gnawed at him. He confessed to close friends that he no longer knew who he could trust, that the line between truth and illusion had blurred beyond recognition. The impact of this breaking point extended beyond his marriage. Harry's already strained relationship with his family worsened. Conversations with his brother William grew sharper, each word loaded with unspoken accusations. Charles, ever the pragmatist, urged Harry to maintain dignity and silence, but Harry's guilt made silence unbearable. He began to see himself not just as a victim of the monarchy, but as an active participant in its machinery of deception. For a man who had once vowed never to repeat the mistakes of the past, this realization was devastating. At the heart of Harry's breaking point was his love for his children. Archie and Lilibet were innocent, yet they would grow up under the shadow of secrecy and scandal. Harry worried about the day they would ask questions, the day they would search the internet and find the endless debates about their births. He imagined their confusion, their hurt, their sense of betrayal. More than anything else, he feared becoming the source of their pain. For a man who had been shaped by the trauma of losing his mother, the thought of inflicting trauma on his own children was unbearable. Harry's breakdown did not end with despair alone. It also planted the seed of determination. Once the truth was out, once the letters had been revealed, he knew the only way forward was through confession. The years of denial, of defensiveness, had led him here. To continue the lie would destroy him completely. For all the humiliation, for all the backlash, there was a strange relief in knowing that the weight of secrecy could no longer hold him down. His breaking point, though painful, became the turning point that would set the stage for what came next. The moment he and Meghan would finally face the world and admit what they had fought so long to hide. Harry's breaking point was not just a private collapse. It was the unraveling of the myth of control, the moment the facade of power gave way to the raw reality of truth. For the monarchy, it was a disaster. For Harry, it was liberation through pain. And for the world watching, it was a reminder that even those born into palaces and privilege cannot escape the crushing weight of secrets. The confession that Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy was monumental, but it left behind questions that demanded answers. Who were the women who carried the children of one of the most famous couples in the world? What were their stories, their experiences, and their sacrifices? Until now, those women had lived in the shadows, bound by legal agreements, confidentiality clauses, and the immense pressure of carrying not only children but also the weight of a royal secret. The surrogate story is not one of scandal or manipulation. It is a story of humanity, of women asked to step into one of the most unusual and high-stakes arrangements imaginable. The first surrogate, who carried Archie, was described by insiders as a woman carefully chosen for her discretion, health, and resilience. She was not a stranger to surrogacy, having previously participated in similar arrangements for private families. But this time was different. This time, the stakes were higher, the scrutiny sharper, and the conditions stricter. According to those who knew her, she was proud of the role she was playing, aware that she was carrying a child who would grow up under extraordinary circumstances. Yet she was also aware of the secrecy that surrounded the arrangement. She lived in relative isolation during the pregnancy, protected not only for medical reasons, but also to shield her from potential discovery. Her movements were restricted, her communications monitored, and her interactions with the outside world carefully managed. It was not imprisonment, but it was control necessitated by the desire to keep the truth hidden. The surrogate's emotional journey was complex. On one hand, she felt honored to help bring a child into the world for a couple who desperately wanted to be parents. On the other, she carried the strain of knowing that her role would never be acknowledged, her contribution never celebrated. There would be no public recognition, no gratitude expressed openly. Instead, her name would be erased from the story, her presence denied, her sacrifice buried under layers of secrecy. For many surrogates, the joy of seeing intended parents hold their child for the first time is a moment of profound satisfaction. For her, that moment was bittersweet, clouded by the knowledge that the child she carried would be presented to the world as though her role had never existed. The second surrogate, who carried Lilibet, faced even greater challenges. By this time, the scrutiny around Meghan and Harry was intense, and the couple had already distanced themselves from royal duties. The arrangement took place largely in the United States, where surrogacy is more openly practiced but no less complicated. Legal negotiations were extensive, covering every possible detail: medical care, financial compensation, confidentiality, and even the surrogate's future silence. For this woman, too, the arrangement required sacrifice. Her health, her time, and her emotional well-being were all placed in service of a secret that would never be hers to tell. Those close to her describe a woman of quiet strength, someone who understood the magnitude of what she was doing but chose to proceed anyway. Perhaps it was financial incentive, perhaps compassion, perhaps a combination of both. What is clear is that her role was just as hidden, her presence just as denied, as the first surrogates. When Lilibet was born, the public was given a sanitized announcement, a curated image, and nothing more. The surrogate remained in the shadows, her story erased before it could ever be told. The emotional toll on both women cannot be underestimated. Surrogacy, even under the best circumstances, is a profound physical and psychological experience. To carry a child, to nurture life within your body, and then to hand that child to another family requires strength and selflessness. Most surrogates enter the arrangement with clear expectations, aware of the boundaries and the outcomes. But in this case, the secrecy added another layer of complexity. They were not only carrying children, they were carrying the burden of silence. They could not share their experiences with friends, could not celebrate openly, could not post photographs or write journals. Everything had to be hidden, every detail guarded. The very act of talking about the pregnancy in casual conversation could have risked exposure. For Harry and Meghan, the surrogates were both saviors and symbols. They gave the couple what they desired most, children, while also embodying the secrecy the couple believed was necessary to protect themselves. In private, Meghan is said to have expressed deep gratitude to both women, acknowledging the enormity of what they had done. But in public, she could never name them, never celebrate them, never admit their existence. For the surrogates, this erasure was part of the bargain. But bargains, even legal ones, do not erase the emotional reality. The financial aspect of the arrangements was significant. In the United States, surrogacy can cost upwards of 6 figures, with additional expenses for medical care, legal fees, and living stipends. For Harry and Meghan, money was not the issue. They had the resources to ensure the women were cared for. But the financial compensation could never fully cover the emotional cost of being silenced. These women had stories to tell, but the contracts ensured those stories would remain untold. Until, of course, the confession came. Once Harry and Meghan admitted the truth, speculation about the surrogates reignited. Who were they? Where were they now? Did they feel pride, or regret, or relief? The children themselves, Archie and Lilibet, are the ultimate testaments to the surrogate's sacrifice. They are loved, cherished, and nurtured by Harry and Meghan, who see them as the center of their world. But as they grow older, they will inevitably confront questions about their origins. For them, the surrogate's story is not abstract, it is part of their identity. How they come to terms with that truth will depend not only on their parents' guidance, but also on how much of the surrogate's humanity is acknowledged. If the surrogates are forever erased from the narrative, Archie and Lilibet may struggle to reconcile their own beginnings with the stories told about them. The surrogate story is a reminder that behind every royal scandal are ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances. These women were not pawns or conspirators. They were individuals who agreed to help a couple create a family, and in doing so, became part of history. Yet history will not remember their names, their faces, or their sacrifices. Their contribution will live in silence, overshadowed by the drama of confession and controversy. For the monarchy, the surrogate story is deeply uncomfortable. It challenges the myth of unbroken lineage, the illusion that royal births are untouched by modern realities. For Harry and Meghan, it is both a source of gratitude and a reminder of the deception they chose. For the surrogates themselves, it is a chapter of life they will never publicly claim, even as its consequences ripple across the world stage. The chapter ends with the realization that the surrogates, though unseen, were central to everything. Without them, there would be no Archie, no Lilibet, no confession, and no scandal. Their silence was as necessary as their sacrifice. Yet silence cannot erase reality. They carried the children, bore the weight, and live the truth that the world was denied for years. And now, as the confession reverberates across the globe, their story, though faceless and nameless, stands as the quiet foundation of a truth that changed royal history forever. When the confession finally came, many were left asking the same question. Why? Why would Harry and Meghan, a couple who positioned themselves as advocates for truth, authenticity, and openness, go to such extraordinary lengths to conceal the reality of their children's births? Why construct a facade so elaborate, risk so much, and cling to the illusion long after whispers of doubt had begun to surface? The answer is layered, a blend of personal fear, cultural expectation, royal tradition, and the crushing weight of public scrutiny. To understand why they lied, one must look not only at the couple themselves, but at the world they lived in and the forces that shaped their choices. For Meghan, the decision was deeply personal. From the moment she entered the royal family, she was cast as an outsider. Her background, her career, her race, her nationality, all were scrutinized and dissected by the British press. Every mistake was amplified, every gesture analyzed, every rumor weaponized. In such an environment, admitting to surrogacy felt impossible. Meghan feared it would be seized upon as proof that she did not belong, that she was unfit to fulfill the role of a royal mother. In her private letters, she confessed her fear of being branded inadequate, of being mocked for failing to embody the archetype of the glowing royal mother that the public expected. For a woman who had already endured relentless character attacks, the thought of handing critics another weapon was unbearable. Harry's reasons were different, but no less powerful. His entire life had been defined by the trauma of public exposure. From the moment his mother died in a car crash pursued by paparazzi, Harry carried a fierce determination to shield those he loved from the cruelty of the press. In Meghan, he saw someone he needed to protect. In his children, he saw an opportunity to break the cycle of pain. To admit the truth of surrogacy, in his mind, would have been to expose his family to ridicule, to invite the very kind of intrusion he had sworn to prevent. Lying, to him, was not about deception but about defense. It was a shield, however fragile, against a world he believed was always waiting to attack. Beyond their personal fears lay the larger force of royal tradition. The monarchy has long been obsessed with image, and few images are more sacred than that of royal births. From the announcement of pregnancy to the presentation of the newborn, every detail is choreographed to reinforce continuity and legitimacy. To deviate from that tradition would be seen not only as unconventional but as destabilizing. Surrogacy, though increasingly accepted in society, remains a sensitive subject within the rigid confines of monarchy. Questions about legitimacy, succession, and precedent would have swirled immediately. By choosing secrecy, Harry and Meghan avoided the storm they believed would engulf them if the truth came out. They lied not only to the public, but also, in a sense, to protect the monarchy itself from a truth it was not prepared to confront. There was also the matter of control. Harry and Meghan's relationship with the media had been fraught from the beginning. They distrusted journalists, resented the tabloids, and bristled under constant surveillance. In their eyes, admitting to surrogacy would mean losing control of the narrative. They would no longer be able to dictate how their story was told. Instead, it would be spun by tabloids, debated on television, dissected on social media. By lying, they retained control, or at least the illusion of it. Every photograph, every announcement, every carefully managed event was part of their attempt to dictate what the world saw and believed. Yet beneath these rationalizations lay something more human: shame. In a world where perfection is demanded, imperfection is often hidden. Meghan's fear of appearing weak, Harry's fear of appearing powerless, both were rooted in shame. Surrogacy is not shameful, but within the royal context, it could be framed as such. They believed that admitting the truth would diminish them, strip them of dignity, and make them targets of ridicule. Shame is a powerful motivator, and in this case, it drove them to construct a lie so elaborate it consumed their lives. Critics argue that the lie itself caused more harm than the truth ever could have. Had Harry and Meghan admitted from the beginning that they chose surrogacy, they might have faced controversy, but they also might have won admiration for their honesty. Instead, the deception eroded trust. Each staged photograph, each evasive answer, Each carefully managed appearance became, in retrospect, evidence of manipulation. The public felt betrayed not by the surrogacy, but by the years of denial. The monarchy, too, saw the lie as an affront to its traditions. Even those who sympathized with Harry and Meghan's struggles found it difficult to reconcile their advocacy for truth with their willingness to conceal such a fundamental reality. The lie also placed immense strain on their marriage. Meghan, convinced secrecy was essential, pushed for silence. Harry, though initially supportive, grew increasingly torn between his instinct to protect and his need to live authentically. The conflict between them deepened as the years passed, their unity fraying under the pressure of sustaining the illusion. Their confession, when it finally came, was not only a public revelation but a private reckoning. It forced them to confront the cost of their choices, not only in public trust but in their own relationship. Understanding why they lied also requires acknowledging the pressures of celebrity culture. Harry and Meghan were not just royals, they were global icons, their every move broadcast and monetized. In such a world, image is currency. The illusion of pregnancy, the staged photographs, the curated narratives, all of it fed into the brand they were building. Lying about surrogacy allowed them to maintain the image of a perfect royal couple, a modern fairy tale that attracted media deals, book contracts, and interviews. The financial incentives for maintaining the facade cannot be ignored. Their brand thrived on the illusion, and admitting the truth too early might have diminished its value. And yet, for all the reasons that explain why they lied, none of them justify the cost. The secrecy consumed them. It eroded their trust in each other, strained their ties to the monarchy, and damaged their credibility with the public. Most tragically, it created a legacy of deception that their children will one day inherit. The very thing Harry and Meghan sought to avoid, pain for their children, was made inevitable by their decision to conceal the truth. The chapter closes with the recognition that lies, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot withstand the passage of time. Harry and Meghan lied because they were afraid of judgment, afraid of ridicule, afraid of losing control. They lied because the monarchy demanded perfection and the media devoured imperfection. They lied because they were human, caught in a storm too powerful to escape. But in lying, they set themselves on a path where truth became inevitable, where confession was not a choice, but a necessity. Why they lied is a story of fear, shame, and control. But more than that, it is a story of a couple trying to survive in a world that demanded more than they could give. Their lie was born of desperation, but its consequences will define their legacy forever. Lies on their own are fragile. They cannot survive without structure, without scaffolding to hold them upright when cracks begin to show. In Harry and Meghan's case, their deception about Archie and Lilibet's births required more than silence and secrecy. It required an entire machine of cover-ups, an intricate web of legal maneuvering, media manipulation, and tightly managed appearances. What emerged was not simply a lie told to the public, but a coordinated campaign to ensure that the truth of surrogacy could not be uncovered. This machine was deliberate, relentless, and deeply revealing about the lengths to which powerful figures will go when survival depends on keeping secrets buried. The first layer of the cover-up machine was legal. Confidentiality agreements were drawn up with ruthless precision. Everyone involved in the surrogacy process, from medical professionals to legal advisors, from surrogates themselves to household staff, was bound by strict non-disclosure clauses. These contracts were not vague gestures. They were enforceable, backed by the threat of severe financial penalties. Lawyers ensured that no one, not even by accident, could speak freely. Documents were sealed, medical records kept private, and any trace of involvement carefully erased. The intention was clear. If the truth ever slipped out, it would be drowned in a storm of legal retribution. The second layer was paperwork manipulation. Birth certificates, normally straightforward documents, became tools of obfuscation. Names of hospitals were omitted or amended. Details were altered in ways subtle enough not to draw immediate suspicion, but deliberate enough to muddy the waters. These adjustments created an administrative fog, making it difficult for journalists or curious onlookers to trace the truth. The paperwork looked official, but it did not tell the whole story. In this way, bureaucracy itself became an accomplice in the deception. The third layer was media control. Harry and Meghan, already distrustful of the press, exerted unprecedented levels of control over their public image. Access to Meghan during her pregnancies was sharply restricted. Journalists were kept at a distance, their questions deflected or ignored. Photographs released to the public were vetted and approved by the couple's team, ensuring that no image could inadvertently reveal too much. For public appearances, Meghan's clothing was chosen carefully. Sometimes to conceal, sometimes to emphasize, always to direct the narrative. When speculation grew, the couple positioned themselves as victims of media intrusion, framing questions about the pregnancies as harassment. This tactic was effective. It cast doubt on critics and rallied supporters, many of whom saw any suspicion as cruelty. The fourth layer was performance. Meghan's constant habit of cradling her stomach, her carefully staged appearances, her radiant yet controlled demeanor, all were part of a performance designed to reinforce the illusion of pregnancy. At the time, it seemed natural, even endearing. In retrospect, it was theater, every gesture calculated to deflect doubt. Harry played his part as well, fiercely defending Meghan, lashing out at critics, and presenting himself as the protective husband. Their unity, their visible devotion to each other, was itself part of the cover-up. It gave credibility to their narrative, convincing the public that questioning them was an act of cruelty rather than curiosity. But the cover-up machine was not flawless. Cracks appeared. Photographs of Meghan's bump that seemed inconsistent sparked debates online. Delays and discrepancies in paperwork raised suspicions among journalists. Staff whispers leaked into tabloids, though never with enough detail to break the story outright. Each time cracks appeared, the machine worked overtime to patch them. Lawyers sent warnings. Spokespeople issued vague statements. Sympathetic media outlets ran stories reframing criticism as bullying. The machine never stopped, always humming in the background, smoothing over fissures and reinforcing the facade. What makes the cover-up so striking is the extent to which it mirrored the monarchy's own methods. For centuries, the royal family has relied on silence, control, and careful image management to protect its secrets. Affairs were hidden, scandals buried, and inconvenient truths reframed. Harry and Meghan, who had positioned themselves as rebels breaking free from the institution, ended up replicating its tactics. In trying to shield themselves, they became what they claimed to despise, architects of deception, using the same tools of manipulation they accused the monarchy of wielding against them. The machine also relied heavily on the loyalty and silence of those within their orbit. Staff were instructed to maintain privacy at all costs, often without being told exactly what they were protecting. Photographers, contractors, and even friends were given limited access, each kept on a need-to-know basis. In this way, the deception was compartmentalized. No one outside the innermost circle had the full picture, but everyone contributed to maintaining the illusion. It was a web of half-truths and omissions, each strand designed to hold the larger lie in place. The cost of running such a machine was immense, both financially and emotionally. Lawyers were on constant retainer. Public relations advisors worked tirelessly to manage optics. Staff lived under the strain of silence, carrying doubts they could not express. Harry and Meghan themselves bore the heaviest burden, forced to inhabit roles that left little room for authenticity. Their every public appearance became a performance, their every private moment shadowed by the fear of exposure. The machine did not protect them, it imprisoned them. And yet, for years, it worked. The truth remained hidden, whispers stayed whispers, and the facade held firm. But no machine, however well-oiled, can run forever. Over time, the strain grew too great. The cracks widened. The letters Meghan wrote exposed the machinery in black and white, revealing just how deliberate the cover-up had been. Once those letters surfaced, the machine collapsed under its own weight. What had once seemed like privacy now looked like deceit. What had once been seen as control now appeared as manipulation. The cover-up machine is central to understanding the scale of the scandal. It was not a single lie told in desperation, but a sustained, coordinated campaign involving countless moving parts. It shows the extent to which Harry and Meghan felt trapped, the depth of their fear, and the lengths they were willing to go to protect their secret. It also shows how fragile even the most elaborate deceptions can be. No matter how many lawyers, documents, or performances are employed, truth has a way of breaking through. The chapter closes with the haunting realization that the cover-up machine, once their shield, became their undoing. By investing so much in secrecy, they ensured that when the truth emerged, the backlash would be even harsher. The world was not simply reacting to surrogacy. It was reacting to years of manipulation. The machine had bought them time, but it had also built the stage for their eventual downfall. When the truth finally came, it was not whispered, it roared, shattering the illusion they had worked so hard to maintain. When the truth finally surfaced, the shockwaves rippled far beyond Harry and Meghan's California home. The royal family, already strained by years of division, interviews, and public feuds, now faced a revelation that cut to the very core of what the monarchy represents. The fallout was immediate, devastating, and deeply personal. For a family that thrives on secrecy but insists on projecting unity, the confession of surrogacy and the deception surrounding it was not just a scandal. It was a breach of trust that threatened to fracture relationships permanently. At the center of the fallout was Prince William. For years, tensions between the brothers had been simmering, boiling over during Harry and Meghan's exit from royal duties and their high-profile interviews. But the revelation that Harry had been complicit in a deception of this magnitude enraged William. He had always been protective of the monarchy, understanding that its survival depended on trust and tradition. To him, Harry's actions were more than a personal mistake. They were an attack on the very foundation of the crown. Reports suggested that William confronted Harry in private, his anger fueled not only by the lie itself, but by the years of public defense Harry had mounted against what he dismissed as rumor. To William, it was betrayal stacked upon betrayal. Charles, now king, approached the fallout differently. Ever the pragmatist, Charles had long balanced personal frustration with institutional necessity. He understood better than most the damage scandal could inflict on the monarchy, having lived through the chaos of his divorce and the death of Diana. Yet, even he was stunned by the revelation. The secrecy around surrogacy was not merely a personal family matter. It carried potential implications for the legitimacy of succession. Even though Archie and Lilibet were not in the immediate line to the throne, the perception that royal births had been falsified shook public confidence. Charles's instinct was to contain the damage, to manage the crisis quietly. But his ability to do so was limited. The confession had already broken into the public domain. Damage control was no longer about preventing exposure, but about minimizing collapse. For Camilla, the scandal was both vindication and humiliation. Long accused herself of being a manipulator and usurper, she had fought for decades to gain acceptance within the royal fold. Meghan's deception confirmed what she had privately warned, that outsiders brought instability. Yet the scandal also reopened old wounds, dredging up comparisons between her own controversial past and Meghan's choices. Camilla, though outwardly composed, was said to be deeply unsettled by the entire affair. The Queen, had she lived to see it, would have been devastated. Elizabeth II had always valued dignity, stability, and continuity above all else. She understood better than anyone the delicate balance between tradition and modernity. To her, the idea that a royal couple had lied so openly, had manipulated appearances and concealed truth, would have been unthinkable. While she had tolerated Harry and Meghan's independence to a point, this revelation would have tested even her legendary patience. The Queen's death spared her the spectacle, but the fallout unfolded in her absence, leaving her heirs to grapple with consequences she might have softened. Within the family, the confession deepened divides. Trust, already fragile, shattered completely. Senior royals questioned how long Harry and Meghan had been planning their confession, and whether they had manipulated family members as well as the public. Some accused them of timing the revelation to coincide with personal or financial gain, framing the confession as less about truth and more about control. For those who had defended the couple against relentless tabloid attacks, the confession felt like betrayal. They had shielded Harry and Meghan, only to discover that the couple had been shielding a lie. The fallout was not limited to family dynamics. It spilled into the institution itself. Courtiers and advisors, blindsided by the confession, scrambled to address the crisis. For years, they had dismissed speculation as conspiracy, confident in the narrative Harry and Meghan presented. Now, they found themselves accused of either incompetence or complicity. Questions arose about who had known, when they had known, and what they had done to maintain the illusion. Some within the palace pushed for a public statement distancing the institution from Harry and Meghan's choices, while others urged silence, fearing that any acknowledgement would only fan the flames. The monarchy, once again, found itself paralyzed by scandal. The fallout also altered the dynamic between the Sussexes and the wider royal family. Reconciliation, already difficult, now seemed impossible. William reportedly made clear that trust could never be rebuilt. Charles, while willing to maintain private lines of communication, recognized that Harry and Meghan's role within the monarchy was irreparably damaged. The prospect of the Sussex children participating in royal life grew uncertain. Invitations to official events were reconsidered, and their titles became the subject of whispered debate. The monarchy could not afford to be seen as condoning deception, yet cutting off the Sussexes entirely risked alienating younger generations who sympathized with them. For Harry, the fallout was both personal and existential. He had lost not only his brother's trust, but also much of the credibility he once held as the people's prince. For Meghan, the fallout reinforced her sense of isolation from the royal family, confirming what she had long claimed, that she would never truly belong. Together, they found themselves in a liminal space, too estranged to be royal, too royal to be ordinary. Their confession had freed them from secrecy, but bound them to scandal. The public reaction mirrored the family's divisions. Some sympathized with Harry and Meghan, framing their lie as the product of impossible pressures. Others condemned them, arguing that they had betrayed the public's trust. For monarchists, the fallout was ammunition against the couple, proof that their departure from royal duties had been justified. For Republicans, it was proof of the monarchy's hypocrisy, showing that even in the modern age, secrets and illusions were prioritized over honesty. The confession, far from clarifying their story, polarized opinion further, leaving Harry and Meghan both vilified and vindicated, depending on the audience. The fallout's most painful consequence was the effect on family bonds. The brothers, once inseparable, now stood on opposite sides of an unbridgeable chasm. William saw betrayal, Harry saw liberation. Charles saw instability, Meghan saw survival. The monarchy saw scandal, the public saw theater. And in the middle stood Archie and Lilibet, children too young to understand but destined to grow up under the shadow of decisions they never made. When the confession finally reached the public, it was as though the entire globe paused for a moment. For years, speculation about Harry and Meghan had simmered, fueling tabloids, online forums, and debates at dinner tables. Yet speculation had always remained just that: rumors, gossip, unconfirmed theories. Now, with Harry and Meghan themselves admitting that Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy, the world had to reconcile years of doubt with the sudden reality of truth. The reaction was swift, overwhelming, and divided, revealing not only opinions about the couple but also deeper truths about how society views royalty, family, and honesty. The initial response came through headlines. Newspapers splashed the confession across their front pages with language that ranged from sympathetic to scathing. In Britain, tabloids reacted with fury, painting the admission as betrayal not only of the monarchy but of the public trust. "Deception of the century," read one headline, while another declared, "Sussex lies finally exposed." In contrast, more liberal outlets attempted a balanced approach, acknowledging the pain that had driven Harry and Meghan to secrecy while still questioning the morality of their deception. Across the Atlantic, American media took a softer tone, framing the confession as a story of personal struggle against impossible odds. Yet even in the United States, where Harry and Meghan enjoyed greater support, the revelation raised eyebrows. Audiences who had defended the couple for years were left wondering why the truth had taken so long. On social media, the reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Twitter and Instagram lit up with hashtags, some supportive, others condemning. Supporters rallied around Meghan, arguing that her decision to keep surrogacy private was justified in the face of relentless bullying and racism from the press. They shared messages of solidarity, emphasizing that surrogacy is a valid and loving path to parenthood. But critics were just as loud, accusing the couple of hypocrisy. If they wanted privacy, why build a global brand around honesty? One comment read. Others pointed to the irony of Harry and Meghan criticizing the monarchy for secrecy while engaging in it themselves. The online battlefield grew brutal, with both sides convinced they were defending the truth. The confession also sparked broader conversations about surrogacy itself. In some circles, the revelation was an opportunity to destigmatize surrogacy, to highlight it as a compassionate and necessary choice for families unable to conceive naturally. Advocacy groups seized the moment to educate the public, arguing that Meghan's decision should not be judged but respected. Yet others saw the secrecy as damaging, reinforcing the idea that surrogacy was something shameful to be hidden. If Meghan had been honest from the beginning, one commentator noted, she could have normalized surrogacy at the highest level of society. Instead, she made it seem like a scandal. The monarchy's supporters reacted with indignation. For them, the confession was not just about Harry and Meghan's personal choices, but about the erosion of tradition. Royal births had always been treated as moments of continuity, symbols of legitimacy. To admit that those births had been shrouded in deception felt, to many, like an attack on the institution itself. Polls conducted in the weeks following the revelation showed a sharp decline in support for the Sussexes within the United Kingdom. Even among younger generations, who had once viewed Harry and Meghan as modernizing figures, trust was shaken. The perception was not that they had used surrogacy, but that they had lied about it for years, demanding sympathy while concealing truth. In the Commonwealth, reactions varied. In countries like Canada and Australia, where Republican movements have gained traction, the confession was framed as further evidence of the monarchy's irrelevance. If royal births could be fabricated, what other traditions were hollow? In other nations, particularly those with strong cultural taboos around surrogacy, the reaction was harsher. Religious leaders criticized the couple, framing surrogacy as unnatural or immoral. In contrast, more progressive circles praised Harry and Meghan for finally admitting the truth, arguing that their confession could spark important conversations about modern family-making. World leaders, while cautious, could not entirely ignore the scandal. Politicians in Britain avoided direct comment, wary of being seen as interfering with the monarchy, but whispers in Parliament revealed concern. For a monarchy already under scrutiny in the post-Elizabethan era, the scandal fed Republican arguments that the institution was archaic and dishonest. In America, where Harry and Meghan had made their home, political figures remained largely silent, though some commentators noted that the scandal complicated the couple's attempts to build influence in Hollywood and philanthropy. Their image as champions of truth and justice had been tarnished, raising doubts about their authenticity in public causes. The entertainment industry also reacted. Celebrities who had once supported Harry and Meghan were divided in their responses. Some doubled down in loyalty, praising their courage for confessing. Others quietly distanced themselves, unwilling to attach their brands to a couple now associated with deception. Television hosts debated the scandal endlessly, turning it into fodder for late-night jokes and serious panel discussions alike. Netflix and Spotify, who had invested heavily in Harry and Meghan's brand, reportedly reviewed the impact on their deals, concerned about whether audiences would still trust or engage with the couple's projects. Beyond the headlines and debates, the public reaction carried a more emotional dimension. Ordinary people felt betrayed. For those who had defended Meghan against accusations of lying, the confession was humiliating. They had invested their energy in combating what they saw as racist and sexist attacks, only to discover that some criticisms were rooted in truth. For those who had doubted her all along, the confession was vindication, proof that they had been right. But vindication often carries bitterness. Even skeptics felt unsettled by how easily they had been dismissed as conspiracy theorists. The confession reframed years of debate, making the skeptics look credible and the defenders look naive. Amid the noise, one theme emerged clearly. The confession had polarized the world more than ever. Harry and Meghan were no longer simply figures of sympathy or disdain. They had become symbols of the battle between authenticity and illusion, modernity and tradition, truth and deception. To some, they were victims of impossible expectations, forced to lie by a monarchy that demanded perfection. To others, They were hypocrites who built careers on honesty while hiding a fundamental truth. The world's reaction said as much about global attitudes toward power, family, and celebrity as it did about the couple themselves. The confession also had unexpected ripple effects. Other celebrities who had used surrogacy began to speak more openly about their experiences, some citing Meghan's admission as a turning point. In medical and legal circles, debates about surrogacy laws intensified, with some arguing for greater transparency and regulation. In academic spaces, the scandal was analyzed as a case study in media manipulation, celebrity branding, and the challenges of public authenticity in the digital age. Yet, despite all the reactions, one truth remained constant. The confession could not be undone. The world now knew what had been hidden. No amount of sympathy or outrage could change the fact that Archie and Lilibet's origins were different from what the public had been told. The reaction, however divided, confirmed the magnitude of the revelation. It was not merely a royal scandal. It was a cultural moment, one that forced millions to confront uncomfortable questions about honesty, privacy, and the demands placed on public figures. When Meghan finally broke down and admitted the truth, the world witnessed a side of her rarely seen. For years, she had been defiant, polished, always in control of her image. She had stood in interviews with poise, given speeches with clarity, and projected strength even in the face of hostility. But on the day of her confession, the mask slipped. It was no longer the actress delivering carefully rehearsed lines or the Duchess protecting royal dignity. It was Meghan, raw and undone, tears streaming as she confronted the reality she had spent years trying to hide. The moment came not with grandeur, but with quiet intensity. Meghan, seated beside Harry, trembled as she began to speak. Her voice wavered, her hands clutched a folded handkerchief, and her eyes betrayed the exhaustion of years of secrecy. "I lied," she whispered, her words barely audible at first, then stronger as she forced herself to repeat them. "I lied because I was afraid. I lied because I thought I had no choice. Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy. I never carried them." It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of years of rumors, denials, and manipulations. The tears were not staged. Observers noted the way Meghan's shoulders shook, the raw redness around her eyes, the unsteady rhythm of her breathing. This was no performance for cameras, no polished act. It was the collapse of a woman who had spent too long holding up a narrative that had grown too heavy. In that moment, Meghan ceased to be the polarizing figure of royal gossip and became something more universal, a human being overwhelmed by the consequences of her choices. Her confession revealed more than just the fact of surrogacy. It exposed the fear that had driven her. Meghan spoke of the relentless criticism she had endured, the attacks on her character, the accusations of not belonging. She admitted that she had believed revealing the truth would destroy her, that it would strip her of dignity and invite ridicule. "I wanted to be strong," she said through tears. "I wanted the world to see me as enough. But I was terrified they would see me as less." Her words resonated with millions, especially women who had felt judged for their fertility, their choices, or their bodies. Harry sat beside her, visibly torn. He reached for her hand, his own eyes wet with tears. For him, Meghan's confession was both devastating and relieving. Devastating because it confirmed the deception they had built together, relieving because at last, the truth was out. He did not speak as much during the moment, but his silence carried weight. His body leaned toward her, his expression a mix of pain and loyalty. Whatever the world might think, he was standing by her side. The confession was recorded and broadcast, and within hours, clips of Meghan's tearful admission spread across the globe. Some viewers sympathized deeply, moved by the vulnerability she displayed. Others dismissed the tears as another performance, accusing her of playing victim yet again. But regardless of interpretation, no one could ignore the power of the moment. It was history in motion, a duchess admitting to a deception that had fooled the world, her tears washing away years of speculation and cementing her place in the annals of royal scandal. Behind the confession lay months of preparation. Insiders revealed that Meghan had agonized over how to tell the truth. She had considered silence, denial, even counterattacks against her critics. But as pressure mounted and evidence grew undeniable, confession became inevitable. Still, The timing was carefully chosen. By speaking in her own words, on her own terms, Meghan sought to reclaim agency. "If the story is going to be told," she reportedly said in private, "I want it told by me." Her tears, then, were not just expressions of pain but also of release. Years of fear, shame, and secrecy poured out in a torrent she could no longer control. In the aftermath, Meghan's confession sparked debate about authenticity. Critics claimed she had chosen the moment strategically, calculating that public sympathy might outweigh condemnation. Supporters argued the tears were proof of her humanity, evidence that even women in palaces carry burdens too heavy to bear. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Meghan's confession was both genuine and strategic, both emotional collapse and narrative control. It was the paradox of her public life, vulnerability wielded as both survival and spectacle. What made the confession so poignant was the glimpse it offered into Meghan's private torment. She described sleepless nights, haunted by the fear of being exposed. She admitted to feeling like a fraud, smiling in public while carrying a secret that consumed her. She spoke of the guilt she felt toward her children, knowing that one day they would discover the truth and wonder why it had been hidden. Her tears were not just for herself, but for them, for the legacy of deception they would inherit. "I wanted to protect them," she cried. "But in protecting them, I may have hurt them more." Harry's reaction to her words added another layer of depth. Though clearly shaken, he remained steadfast in his support. His hand on hers was not just a gesture of comfort, but a silent declaration. They were in this together. Yet his eyes betrayed the storm within him. He had reached his breaking point in private, but now the world could see the cost written on his face. For Harry, Meghan's confession was the culmination of years of conflict, a moment when love, loyalty, and truth collided. The public, watching from living rooms and phones around the world, reacted with the same polarization that had defined Meghan's time as a royal. Some saw her tears as brave, the act of a woman finally laying down a burden too heavy to carry. Others saw them as manipulative, a final attempt to spin sympathy from scandal. But whether they believed or doubted, all agreed that the confession marked a turning point. The illusion was gone. The truth, messy and painful, had taken its place. The confession also carried institutional consequences. For the monarchy, Meghan's tears were a nightmare. They underscored not just the deception itself, but the emotional fallout of a system that prized appearances over honesty. Meghan framed her choice to lie as a matter of survival, a way to fit into a world that demanded perfection. For critics of the monarchy, this was proof of its inhumanity. For defenders, it was a disgraceful betrayal. Either way, Meghan's tears reshaped the narrative around the royal family, casting its rigid traditions in an even harsher light. In the wake of Harry and Meghan's confession, the world clamored for clarity. People wanted not just emotional accounts or royal reactions, but hard analysis. How was it possible for such a deception to persist for so long? What were the legal ramifications? How would this impact the monarchy, and what did it mean for the children? To answer these questions, experts from diverse fields, medicine, law, psychology, and public relations, stepped forward to dissect the situation. Their voices added weight to the global debate, offering perspectives that turned raw scandal into a subject of serious inquiry. Medical professionals were among the first to weigh in. Obstetricians and fertility specialists clarified what many in the public did not fully understand. That surrogacy, while often portrayed as unusual or taboo, is a well-established and increasingly common practice. Dr. Elaine Matthews, a London-based fertility specialist, explained that many high-profile families, including celebrities, had turned to surrogacy for reasons ranging from infertility to health risks. "There is no shame in choosing surrogacy," she noted. "What sets this case apart is not the medical reality, but the decision to conceal it." Other doctors echoed her sentiment, pointing out that Meghan's age and reported health history made surrogacy a reasonable choice. Yet, they also stressed that secrecy amplified stigma, reinforcing the idea that surrogacy was something to be hidden rather than accepted. Legal experts brought another dimension. In the United Kingdom, surrogacy is legal but tightly regulated, with restrictions on payments and complex processes for transferring parental rights. In the United States, laws vary by state, with some jurisdictions allowing commercial surrogacy arrangements while others prohibit them. For Harry and Meghan, navigating these systems would have required extensive legal planning. According to solicitor James Fletcher, the secrecy around the births suggested deliberate manipulation of documents to protect privacy. It is highly likely that lawyers were involved from the very beginning, ensuring that records could not be traced or challenged, Fletcher argued. This raised troubling questions about whether the couple, intentionally or not, had bent or even broken rules in their effort to keep the truth hidden. Constitutional scholars focused on the implications for the monarchy. Though Archie and Lilibet were not immediate heirs to the throne, their births still touched on the sensitive issue of succession. Traditionally, royal births were public affairs, with official announcements and transparent records to prevent disputes over legitimacy. By admitting that the births had been hidden through deception, Harry and Meghan had disrupted centuries of precedent. Professor Caroline Howard of Oxford University noted, even if the children's place in the line of succession is not directly challenged, the perception of illegitimacy undermines confidence in the system. Monarchies survive not on force, but on belief. If that belief is shaken, the institution itself trembles. Psychologists weighed in on the human dimension. Dr. Matthew Green, a trauma specialist, emphasized the toll secrecy can take on individuals and families. Lies are corrosive, he explained. They create anxiety, fracture relationships, and ultimately erode trust, even within the family itself. Harry and Meghan may have believed they were protecting themselves, but in reality, they were compounding their stress. Others highlighted the potential impact on Archie and Lilibet as they grow older. Dr. Green warned, children raised in the public eye will inevitably discover the truth of their origins. How their parents handle that revelation will shape their self-identity for life. The secrecy may do more damage than the surrogacy ever could. Public relations experts analyzed the confession as a crisis of image. For years, Harry and Meghan had positioned themselves as champions of truth and authenticity. Their brand was built on the idea of speaking honestly about difficult issues, from racism to mental health. To admit now that they had concealed such a fundamental truth risked destroying that credibility. PR consultant Sarah Langford observed, audiences are willing to forgive almost anything except hypocrisy. The Sussexes will have to work twice as hard to rebuild trust, and even then, the shadow of deception may linger indefinitely. Some advisors suggested that the confession itself, though damaging, was the couple's best hope of salvaging credibility. By admitting the lie, however late, they reclaimed some control over the narrative. Yet the timing and delivery left many skeptical of their motives. Cultural commentators broaden the conversation. In some societies, surrogacy remains taboo, associated with moral or religious objections. In others, it is increasingly normalized. Meghan's confession thrust the issue into global debate. Feminist scholars argued that the backlash revealed persistent double standards. If a male royal had revealed that his wife used surrogacy, the reaction might have been sympathetic, noted activist Claire Jennings. But because Meghan carried the burden of expectation as a woman, her choice was framed as failure. Critics of the monarchy also seized the moment, framing the scandal as evidence of the institution's rigidity. The fact that Meghan felt she had to lie, wrote columnist Martin Hayes, says less about her and more about the monarchy's refusal to adapt to modern realities. Religious leaders added another voice, often critical. In countries where surrogacy is frowned upon, Meghan's confession was framed as a violation of natural order. Sermons condemned the practice, framing it as selfish or unnatural. Yet even within religious circles, some offered compassion, pointing out that the couple's choice reflected the universal human desire for family. This divide mirrored the global debate. Some saw the confession as scandal, others as a human story of vulnerability. Royal historians placed the confession in context. They pointed out that the monarchy has long been shaped by secrets, from concealed illnesses to hidden affairs. Historian Dr. Stephen Clark remarked, "This is not the first time a royal has lied, and it will not be the last." What makes this case remarkable is the scale of the deception and the openness of the eventual confession. It marks a shift in how the monarchy manages scandal. Where once secrets were buried forever, now they are exposed, and the damage is magnified by the speed of modern media. Even financial analysts joined the conversation, noting that Harry and Meghan's brand could suffer materially. Their deals with media companies, their speaking engagements, and their philanthropic ventures all relied on their reputation. When trust erodes, so does market value, explained brand strategist Adrian Wilson. The Sussexes may find that confession costs them not only credibility, but also millions in future revenue. The couple's defenders countered that honesty, even late, could ultimately strengthen their appeal by making them more relatable. Still, the uncertainty underscored the risks of deception in an age where transparency is currency. What emerged from these expert opinions was a mosaic of perspectives, each reinforcing the complexity of the scandal. Medically, surrogacy was normal. Legally, the secrecy was troubling. Constitutionally, the deception was destabilizing. Psychologically, it was damaging. Publicly, it was hypocritical. Culturally, it was divisive. Financially, it was risky. Each voice added weight to the realization that this was not just a personal confession. It was a global event with implications that stretched across disciplines. The experts, however, agreed on one central point. The decision to lie made everything worse. Surrogacy itself might have been accepted, even admired, had it been revealed honestly from the beginning. But the years of secrecy, the elaborate cover-ups, the defensive posturing, those were the choices that turned a private medical decision into a worldwide scandal. The confession was necessary, but it came too late to erase the damage. As the dust settled from Harry and Meghan's revelation, all attention inevitably turned to the most vulnerable figures in the story, Archie and Lilibet. Questions arose across the globe, on every news outlet, social media platform, and in private conversations. How would these revelations affect their childhoods? What impact would public scrutiny and familial tension have on their development? And, most pressing of all, how would the children themselves come to understand the circumstances of their birth? These were not just hypothetical concerns. They were matters that would shape the trajectory of their lives for years to come. Psychologists specializing in child development were quick to weigh in. Many emphasized the importance of framing. Dr. Laura Kendall, a London-based child psychologist, explained that children's understanding of identity evolves with age, and that parental guidance is crucial. Children are remarkably resilient, she said, but resilience is cultivated through honesty, stability, and emotional support. When foundational truths about family or personal history are concealed, it creates a sense of insecurity that can linger into adolescence and adulthood. Kendall noted that the secretive circumstances surrounding Archie and Lilibet's births were a potential source of psychological tension. Even if the children were surrounded by love and protection, the knowledge that information had been deliberately withheld could create confusion and feelings of betrayal later in life. Legal experts also considered the implications for the children. Solicitor Rachel Moore explained, if there were any inconsistencies or alterations in the legal paperwork surrounding their birth, it could complicate matters down the line. It may affect citizenship, inheritance rights, and even access to certain privileges reserved for royals. While there was no immediate threat to their status, Moore emphasized that such issues could resurface when the children reached adulthood and had to navigate their own legal identities. Public scrutiny added another layer of complexity. Unlike most children born through surrogacy or private arrangements, Archie and Lilibet are in the public eye from birth. Every smile, every misstep, every family appearance is documented, analyzed, and often sensationalized. Media experts cautioned that the children could become symbols in a larger narrative, representing either the victims of parental deception or pawns in a royal scandal. Media consultant Hannah Rhodes commented, "The public has a fascination with royal children that borders on obsession. Archie and Lilibet are not just private individuals. They are public figures by circumstance. Managing their exposure carefully will be critical to ensuring they maintain some semblance of normal childhood." Rhodes highlighted the balance Harry and Meghan would need to strike, maintaining privacy without entirely isolating the children from the world they will inevitably inhabit. Cultural commentators reflected on the broader significance. Across the globe, perceptions of surrogacy, secrecy, and royalty intersected in complicated ways. In some countries, surrogacy is widely accepted, and the focus is on the health and well-being of the child. In others, moral, religious, or traditional norms place the child at the center of judgment, sometimes unfairly attributing blame to parents for perceived deception. Professor Elena Martinez, a sociologist specializing in family dynamics, observed, "The children are born into a confluence of societal expectations, historical precedent, and media narratives. How they internalize these messages will depend heavily on their immediate family environment. Positive framing and reassurance can mitigate negative external influences, but the challenges are undeniable." Education experts also expressed concern. The children, like all young royals, will attend institutions that combine rigorous academics with socialization among peers who may have vastly different life experiences. Educators stress the importance of preparing children to handle questions about their family without shame or fear. Private tutor and child development specialist Samuel Price noted, "It is essential for Archie and Lilibet to develop self-confidence and a grounded sense of identity. Teachers and caregivers must work together to ensure that curiosity from peers does not translate into social anxiety or self-doubt." Price suggested that part of this preparation involves controlled disclosure, teaching the children how to respond to inquiries in age-appropriate ways that honor the truth without exposing them to unnecessary scrutiny. Family dynamics were another crucial factor. Despite the ongoing tension between Harry and William, between Meghan and other members of the royal household, the children's relationship with extended family could play a stabilizing role. Analysts of royal history pointed out that even in periods of scandal or discord, strong bonds with grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins often provided essential emotional grounding. Psychologist Dr. Kendall noted, "Children benefit from multiple sources of love and guidance. Even if the immediate household is complicated, positive relationships with extended family can help buffer stress and promote healthy development." She added that, in the context of public exposure, these relationships could also provide a sense of continuity and normalcy that counterbalances the instability created by secrecy and scandal. Public opinion, though unpredictable, has also influenced planning. Following the revelation, social media exploded with speculation about the children's future. Some segments of the public expressed sympathy, advocating for the children's right to privacy and normalcy. Others, driven by fascination or moral judgment, debated the ethical implications of their parents' choices. PR strategist Hannah Rhodes highlighted that this dichotomy presents both challenges and opportunities. While there is a risk of the children becoming symbols in the scandal, careful narrative management can frame them as innocent parties deserving protection and understanding. The focus should be on their well-being, not on perpetuating controversy. Harry and Meghan, for their part, reportedly took these concerns seriously. Sources close to the family indicated that they were implementing a multifaceted strategy to safeguard the children's emotional, psychological, and social well-being. This included limiting media exposure, fostering a nurturing home environment, and working closely with educators, psychologists, and legal advisors. The couple appeared to recognize that their choices, public confession, media appearances, and continued advocacy, would inevitably cast shadows over the children, but that proactive planning could mitigate harm. Experts also emphasized the importance of communication. In child psychology, open, honest, and age-appropriate conversations about family history are crucial for healthy identity development. Dr. Kendall recommended that Harry and Meghan gradually introduce the children to the truth of their births, framing it positively and emphasizing the love and intentionality that surrounded their arrival. "Children can handle complex truths when guided carefully," she explained. "It is the secrecy, the sudden revelations, and the sense of betrayal that cause harm. Preparing them thoughtfully and gradually allows them to internalize the story in a healthy way." The intersection of secrecy, public exposure, and psychological development created a delicate balance. Any misstep could have long-lasting consequences for Archie and Lilibet, potentially affecting self-esteem, social relationships, and their perception of family. But with careful planning, expert guidance, and emotional support, there remained a pathway toward resilience. Psychologists, educators, legal advisors, and cultural analysts all agreed on one principle. The children's needs must come first, separate from the adults' agendas, media narratives, or royal protocol. As the chapter draws to a close, the focus turns to a crucial insight. Archie and Lilibet's future is not predetermined. While the circumstances of their births and the subsequent revelations have introduced challenges, their trajectory depends largely on the environment created for them now. Stability, love, careful communication, and protection from undue public scrutiny are the pillars that can support them. Experts emphasize that while the world will continue to watch, the children's resilience and capacity for happiness ultimately rely on the adults around them making thoughtful, deliberate choices. The lingering question, however, is one that cannot be answered yet. How will Archie and Lilibet, when old enough, come to terms with the full scope of their parents' actions and the public fascination surrounding their lives? Only time will reveal the consequences of this complex, unprecedented situation, but the consensus among experts is clear. With deliberate care and guided support, there remains hope for a healthy, fulfilling childhood for both children, even amid the storm of scandal.